Hello guys! In the last lesson, we explored the relationship between fractions, decimals, and percents. Today we're going to take a little bit more time looking at how to convert a fraction to a percent using equivalent rates. So the first thing we need to think about are the factors of 100. And we've worked previously with greatest common factor and least common multiple, and that skill is going to be pretty important today. So first I want to think, what are the factors of 100? Well, there's 1 and 100, 2 and 50, 3, nope, 3 doesn't work, 4 and 25, because 4 times 25 is 100, 5 and 20, 5 times 20 is 100, and 10. Even though 10 times 10 is 100, you're only going to list 10 once. So you have to remember what a factor is. A factor is one of the numbers that's multiplied to become a product. So 4 times 25 is 100. You multiply those two numbers, and the product of that is 100. When you're working with equivalent rates, especially if you're trying to determine a percent, if a factor of 100 is the denominator of the fraction, you can use multiplication to determine the percent using an equivalent rate. I'm going to write that down. If a factor of 100 is the denominator of the fraction, you can use multiplication to determine the percent using an equivalent rate. Okay, so how does that work? Let's start with just a couple general examples. Let's pretend that on your next quiz, you get a 22 out of 25. So 25 is a factor of 100. So I think to myself, my goal is to have a denominator out of 100 because a percent is out of 100. What do I multiply 25 by to get to 100? I multiply it by 4. Now, in our last unit on rates and ratios, we were able to find equivalent rates and ratios by working with equivalent fractions. So if I'm going to multiply the denominator by 4, I have to multiply the numerator by 4. 22 times 4 is 88. So 22 25ths is equal to 88 100ths, or 88 out of 100, which means that 22 25ths is 88%. All right, let's try another one. Let's say that I've got 11 out of 20. 11 out of 20, and I want to find an equivalent rate where the denominator is 100. 20 times 5 is 100. And if 20 times 5 is 100, then I've got to multiply 11 by 5. 11 times 5 is 55. I have 55 out of 100. That's 55%. Well, what if I'm working with something that has a denominator of 5? Okay. 4/5. So I can go about this one two ways. I'm going to try something a little bit different. 4/5 is equal to 8/10. And I know that 8/10 is equal to 80 out of 100. Mental math, 80%. If I wanted to, I could skip this middle step, and I could ask myself, 5 times what is 100? 20. Multiply the 4 by 20 as well, and I have 80 out of 100, or 80%. Let's try fourths. 1/4 is equal to something out of 100. 4 times 25 is 100. Times 25 is 100. So I get 1/4 is equal to 25 out of 100, or 25%. And so you might say, well, why did you put a variable in some of these proportions, and why on other ones did you just solve? And really, there's no reason why on some of them I solved them with a variable versus some of them I didn't. It's just that there are multiple representations or ways to solve a problem, and you should be familiar with all those. So now that we've come up with a couple examples, I'm going to pull out another sheet of paper. And I'm just going to make a chart of some of the equivalent ratios. Or rates, actually. So let's start with halves. You should be pretty familiar with this one. 1/2 multiplied 2 by what to get 100? It's times 50. Same thing here with the numerator. 50 out of 100 is 50%. What if I have 2 halves? I'm still going to multiply by 50, both the denominator and the numerator. 2 times 50 is 100, and 2 times 50 is 100. And you might think to yourself, well, Miss Carney, why are you doing this one? This one seems pretty simple and straightforward. It does, but a lot of times when it's represented so simply, I mean, obviously 2 halves is the whole thing. We forget that the whole thing is 100% of the whole. We have halves, fourths. So when you're working with fourths, you're going to multiply by 25 because 4 times 25 is 100. 1/4 times 25 times 25. 25 out of 100 is 25%. 2/4. Well, that's equivalent to 1/2, so I already know that's 50%, but just want to make sure I show you the whole pattern anyway. 50 out of 100 is 50%. 3/4. Multiply by 25 again. 3 times 25 is 75. 3/4 is 75%. 4/4, that is the whole thing. And when you have the whole thing, 4 out of 4 pieces, you have 100%. All right. Next, we're going to look at fifths and tenths. Fifths and tenths work hand in hand. Fifths and tenths. So when you're working with fifths, you could multiply by 20 because 5 times 20 is 100. Or you could also think about if I have a fifth of anything, I can easily convert that to tenths, which can be converted to 100ths. But I'm going to show you a couple of examples here anyway. Start with 1/5 equals 2/10, which equals 20 100ths, and that's 20%. 2/5 is 4/10, which is 40 out of 100, which is 40%. So what I was talking about here is that if you choose to, you could go straight from fifths to hundredths by multiplying by 20. All right, 3/5 is equal to 6/10, which is equal to 60 out of 100, which is equal to 60%. 4/5, which is equal to 8/10, which is equal to 80 out of 100, and that's 80%. And then 5/5 of 5/5, of course, is the whole thing, which is 100%. I'm going to take another color and I'm going to go back in between because we've missed a few. We have 1/5, 2/5, 3/5, 4/5, 5/5, 2/10, 4/10. So we've got to look at 3/10, 5/10, 7/10, and 9/10. And with those, like we said before, you might look at that and just be able to say, oh, that's 30%. Or you may need to write that as a fraction out of 100, which is totally fine. And then, of course, we have 30%, 50%. Off the page here. 30%, 50%, 70%, and 90%. Okay. A couple more quick examples that I'm going to show you here, and then we'll wrap this up. All right. So last two things I want to talk about are 20ths and then 25ths. So 20ths and fifths are related. When you have a denominator of 5, you're multiplying it by 20. So when you have a denominator of 20, you'll multiply that by 5. Let's say that you have 9 out of 20, and you want to convert this to a fraction with a denominator of 100. 20 times 5 is 100. 9 times 5 is 45. That's 45 out of 100, or 45%. Same thing, maybe you have 13 out of 20. Out of 100. Let's see, it's going to be times 5. 13 times 5 is 65, which is 65%. I'm not going to go through all the examples with the 20ths. Another thing that you could do, let's say that you had an even number as your numerator, and maybe you had 8 20ths. And when I see this, I think, oh, wow, that's 4/10. That's 40%. That only works if your numerator is an even number. And finally, 25ths. So if you have a denominator of 25, think to yourself, you'll be multiplying that by 4. Let's say I got 23 25ths, 23 out of 25 on my test, 23 out of 25. Then what is that out of 100? 25 times 4 is 100. I'm going to multiply also my numerator by 4. 23 times 4 is 92. Hey, I did pretty good on my test. I got a 92%. How about 15 out of 25? 15 out of 25 multiplied by 4. That'll get that to equivalent fraction out of 100. 15 times 4 is 60. 60 out of 100 is 60%. Maybe I need to study a little bit more next time. All right, guys. Well, just to review today, we took some more time to work on using fractions to convert to a percent using equivalent rates. So if you need to take another look at this one, you can always replay it, and I'll talk to you again soon.